Hello, Princess. I know I promised to do this a while ago, so I'm sorry that it took me a while, but you know how life gets. I'm glad I'm doing it now. This is so that it can help you sleep, or help you feel better, or whatever my princess needs when I'm not around. Okay? This is Alice in Wonderland, Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was getting very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank, and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book that her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what's the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind as well as she could, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing so much very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think so much very much out of the way to hear that the rabbit would say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." When she thought it over afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it all seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took its watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it, and then it hurried on, Alice started to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of one. Burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and, fortunately, was just in time to see it pop down a rather large rabbit hole underneath a hedge. In another moment, Alice went down after it, never once considering how in the world she was going to get back out again. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way, and then it dipped suddenly down. So suddenly, in fact, that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she was falling very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her and wonder what was going to happen next. First she tried to look down and make out what was coming next, but it was too dark to see anything. And then she looked at the sides of the well, and she noticed that they were lined with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps, pictures hung on pegs, and she looked down and she saw a jar on one of the shelves as she passed, and it was labeled Orange Marmalade. But to her great disappointment she found that it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so she managed to put it back on one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after a fall such as this, I shall like to think of nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll think of me back home. Why, I wouldn't say anything of it, except even if I fell off the top of the house, which was very likely true. Down, down, down. Would this fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I must have fallen by this time. She said aloud, I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let's see. That would be about 4,000 miles down, I think. For you see, Alice had learnt several things in this sort of in her lessons while she was in the classroom, and though this was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one around to listen to her, still it was a good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about the right distance, but then I wonder about the latitude or longitude that I've gotten to. Alice had in fact no idea what latitude or longitude was, but the thought was a very nice and grand word to say aloud. Presently she began, I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. I think it will be very funny to come out amongst people that walk with their heads downwards. The antipathies, I think they're called. She was rather glad there was nobody listening at this time, because that didn't actually sound like the right word. In fact, she might have made that word up entirely. But I shall have to ask them when I get there what the name of this country is. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? And she would of course have to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying while you're falling through the air. Do you think that you could actually manage that? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think of me for asking. No, it would never do to ask at all. Perhaps I might see it written somewhere. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking again. Dinah'll miss me very much so tonight, I do think. Dinah was of course her cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I do wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat, and that's very much like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, and she went on to saying to herself in a very dreamy sort of way, do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes she would say, "Do bats eat cats?" For you see, she couldn't actually answer either question, and it didn't matter which way she put it. She felt as though she was dozing off, and she had just begun to dream, and that she was walking hand in hand with her cat Dinah, and she was saying very earnestly, "Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat?" When suddenly, thump! She came down like a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was now over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped up to her feet in a moment. She looked up, and it was all dark overhead. Before her, however, was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight. Hurrying down it, and there was not a moment to be lost. Away Alice went like the wind, and was just in time to hear the rabbit say as it turned a corner, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting!" She was just close behind it when he turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low tunnel, which was lit by a row of lamps which was now hanging from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, and they were all locked. And when Alice had been all down one side and up the other, trying every single door, she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how now she was ever going to get out again. Suddenly she came upon a little three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing on it except a tiny golden key, and Alice's first thought was that she might be belonging to one of the doors in the hall. But alas, either the locks were too large, or the key was too small. But at any rate it would not open any of them. However, on a second time around, she happened upon a low curtain that she had not noticed before, and behind it was, in fact, a tiny little door around 15 inches high. And she tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her golden delight, it fit. Alice opened the door, and she found that it led to a small passage not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked into the passage, and inside was the loveliest garden she had ever seen. How she longed to get out of this dark hall, and she wondered amongst those beds of bright flowers and those cool fountains, but she could not even get her head through this doorway. And if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it would do very little to get the rest of my shoulders through. How I wish I could shut up like a telescope. If I think I could only knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately, that Alice had now begun to think that very few things were indeed really actually impossible. For it seems there was no use waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table, half hoping that she might find another key on it, or at least any rate a book of rules about shutting people up like telescopes. But this time she in fact found a little bottle sitting on the table, "which certainly was not here before," said Alice. And round the neck of the bottle was a little paper label, and the words "Drink me," beautifully printed on it in large letters. It was very well to say "Drink me," but the wise little Alice was not going to do that in a hurry. "No, I'll look first," she said, "and see whether it's marked poison or not," for she had read several little nice histories about children who had gotten burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple little rules that their friends had taught them, such as that red-hot poker will burn you if you hold it for too long, and that if you cut your finger very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that, if you drink from a bottle marked poison, it will most certainly disagree with you sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and, finding it very nice, it had in fact sort of a mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast all at once. She soon finished off the entire bottle. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "It must be like shutting up a telescope," and so it was indeed, for she was now only 10 inches tall, and her face brightened, as though she was now the right size for going through this little door and into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if this shrink was going to happen any further. She felt very nervous about this, for it might, said to Alice herself, it might end up in me going out altogether like a candle. I wonder what I should do then. And she tried to fancy herself as a flame of a candle, and what it would be like to be candle and be blown out by the wind, for she could not remember having ever seen such a thing. And, after a while, finding that nothing more was going to happen, she decided on going into the garden at once. But alas for poor Alice, when she got to the door, she found that she had forgotten the little golden key, and when she went back to the table for it, she found that there was no way that she was going to be able to reach it. She could see it plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up the legs of the table, but they were far too slippery. And when she tired herself out with trying, the poor little thing sat down and began to cry. "Come, there's no use for crying like that," said Alice to herself rather sharply. "I advise that you leave off this minute." She generally gave herself very good advice, though very seldom did she ever follow it. And sometimes she scolded herself so severely as she brought tears into her own eyes, and once she remembered trying to box her own ears for even having cheating herself into a game of croquet when she was playing against herself. But this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people anyways. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice. Pretending to be two people is not going to help here. Why, there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eyes fell onto the little glass box that was now lying under the table, and she opened it, and she found inside a very small cake, and on the words were printed, "Eat me," were printed with very beautifully marked currants. "Well, I guess I'll eat it," she said, Alice, "and if it makes me grow larger I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller I can creep under the door. So either way it'll get me into the garden. I don't really care what happens." She ate a little bit, and said anxiously to herself, "Which way, which way?" holding her hand on top of her head to feel which way it was growing. But she was quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. To be sure, this generally happens when one eats cake, but Alice had gotten so much in the way of expecting nothing out of the way things happen, that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in the common way. So she set to work off, and she soon finished off the entire cake. Chapter 2 will be Pool of Tears.